markets, are they buoyant now that Ghana is an oil producer?
Well, Lorata, firstly, it's a significant day in the country's history, and potentially it's a new source of revenue, which no doubt in time will impact on the country's economy. It's got reserves in the region of about 1.8 billion, which probably puts it in a peer group with the likes of Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, Uganda, which is also coming up, correct, yeah. But I hasten to add, with this will come many challenges for the government, obviously in terms of managing the sector and making sure that oil revenues filter into the broader economy.
There's obviously euphoria today, but are we unduly unrealistic in the sense that initial production is at 120,000 barrels? You've told us that the reserves are at 1.8 billion barrels. But they're expecting that their economy will grow by 12% next year. When you just add up all those figures, is that realistic?
I think that's probably on the high side. Look, in time, you mentioned 120,000 barrels per day. In time, expectations of doubling that. And, with that will come the development of associated industries. Obviously, producers will require consumables for production, remote site services for offshore platforms, acquisition of seismic data. So, therein lies a spin-off. And it's not just oil, but it's gas as well. So in time, gas-fired power plants, pipelines, that sort of thing, which we would hope to see contributing to greater economic growth.
Now, for those wanting to be part of this joyous occasion, they can come in and invest in a variety of investment instruments, which will be available as of January in the global markets. How is the Ghanaian oil being marketed? What systems exist?
Well, they've got adequate structures in place. And I think they've been able to, given Ghana's got a very mature mining sector, I think they've been able to borrow some of the expertise and lessons learned from that sector. So in terms of marketing this new industry, I think they're doing a pretty good job. Of course, they'll have to get structures in place to manage the industry. Now, in prospect, there's a World Bank project. It's the Oil and Gas Capacity Building Project, which the bank's expected to make a loan decision of around about $40 million. And if you unpack that project, you'll see that funding will go into institutional strengthening, assistance to bodies charged with oversight of the industry, and there'll also be an allocation of funding for vocational training to try and skill up local Ghanaians to then participate in the industry as well.
Who are the major players here? I mean, when the oil was discovered, they were in their Jubilee year in Ghana, but who's come in as...
Well, the Jubilee field, the operator is Tullow Oil, which is the London-listed oil company, but working in joint venture with the National Petroleum Company and also other consortium members. Under correction, I think Anadarko are there, as well as some smaller companies as well.
In terms of the need to improve the sector, you've told us about the various elements of institution building, but there are other elements of the sector that must work, not just production facilities, but the legal and regulatory framework, setting up of a royalty tax system, licensing rules. Have the Ghanaians applied their minds thoroughly on these issues?
Lorata, yes, and I think if I can just go back to that World Bank project, in part I think that's going to address those issues. And, Chris, I think you touched on this a moment ago, but, transparency in the industry, all important. And, as an aside, Global Witness earlier this month put out a report on revenues in Angola. And that report points to huge discrepancies or gaps in terms of revenue, which will publish sources from the government as opposed to independent sources. So I think Ghana has got to look to adhere to international best practice, benchmarks set, by example, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, because all eyes are on this infant industry. Yeah.
Chris, your views here. One of the biggest concerns is that Ghana learns from the worst cases in Africa.
Yeah, the one concern is that is oil a blessing or a curse? And in countries that do have strong institutions and constitutional democracies, etc., it can be a blessing. But even in countries where there are strong institutions, the whole term Dutch disease, for instance, comes exactly from that. You discover a new source of revenue and neglect your old sources of revenue. With this oil, Ghana will still be a poor country. So I would certainly hope that they would be looking to use this oil revenues, not to try and ramp up social spending, because that's often the temptation, but to actually invest in the infrastructure, the capacity building for the rest of the economy to take off, so that there's the infrastructure, there's the investment, there's capital essential available for manufacturing. And
Andrew,
other.
just your views here, because some would argue that the Ghanaian economy has been reweighted and it's improved by 70%. It's now middle ranking emerging market economy. We've seen major investments in infrastructure. The banking sector has started to improve. Mining is still performing relatively well. And social development projects is something that the government has committed itself to. So by all indicators, the fundamentals exist in Ghana.
Lerato, absolutely. I think something to add as well is good performance is noticed by its development partners, and whether that be the World Bank, the ADB, the EU, bilateral organizations, and it almost becomes a showcase for then donor funding, which is good for the country. Obviously, you don't want a huge dependence on that. But just to pick up on one thing that Chris mentioned, this dreaded Dutch disease. What you don't want is to see a rapid flight of capital and skills from other sectors, whether it be agriculture or manufacturing, suddenly going all into the oil industry. So that's something that they'll have to manage as well.